Hi, Samir. Welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Hi, Ken. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, Samir, I was just telling you, I heard you about 4 years ago on a podcast called Scale Up with Nick Bradley. And Nick is a really good friend of mine. And it's actually why I invited you to the show. I thought it was so interesting. You wrote a book, The Phoenix Encounter Method Lead Like Your Business is on Fire. I think it wasn't even released yet, but it was very close, like when you were on Nick's show. The timing of it was uncanny because I think at that time, when did it release? End of 2020?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
So lead like your everybody's business was on fire in 2020, but I'm guessing you started writing it pre-COVID. Can you tell us about like the premise of the book and yeah, what what was the overall objective of the book? Who were you trying to help? What message were you trying to get out?
Thanks, Ken, for first of all having me here and
Of
and talking
course.
about this. And as you said, the timing was coincidental that it came out at a point in time when the topic was extremely relevant. And to be honest with you, the topic has always been relevant, and I think
Sure.
becoming even more relevant now. And the reason we wrote that book was coming out of a lot of interactions we used to have with executives that used to come to INSEAD for executive education and executive training. And as we spend a fair amount of time talking to executives, a constant question kept coming up to us for which we didn't have an answer at that point in time, which is how can organizations make sure that they give themselves the best chance of surviving a disruption which perhaps hasn't come about yet, which is out there in the horizon? And how do they make sure that they avoid something that we know will eventually come their way? They just don't know in what shape or form or even when that's going to happen. We understand why firms get disrupted, but we didn't know what they can do about it. And as you can imagine, it's a very difficult question to answer because a lot of things will depend on the context.
Hmm.
It depends on what you do, where you do it, what is the circumstances, what is the environment, what's the business ecosystem, et cetera, et cetera. So we never had a concrete answer, and that was kind of frustrating till we started kind of diving a little bit deeper to understand, well, if we really understand what causes disruption, we know that it could be in various forms. It could be new technologies that caused it. It could be changing customer behavior. It could be just the shift in regulatory frameworks around which organizations have begun to operate. But at the end of the day, there's a very simple reason that is the root cause of this, which is that organizations continue on the path of what brought them success in the past. And that our success from the path colors the way we look at the future.
Right.
And what
That was the
happens is
common thread, right? Is
that
that
was the common thread.
when people had success, they were resistant to change or not even looking for change.
They were not looking for change. And
Yeah.
to some extent, that's not because they're not clever. That's not because they don't have the foresight. It's because that's just the most natural thing to do. I
Yeah.
mean, imagine if you went to your board as a successful CEO and says, well, we've been successful and now I want to change things going forward.
Right.
A lot of people are going to ask, hold on a minute, right? Why do you want to change things? So it's not unnatural, it's common and it's logical.
Right.
But that is precisely what happens to what happened to the Nokias of the world, what happened to the Kodaks of the world, right? Which is they were unable to figure out that perhaps we need to relook at things. So if we have to have a formula, we need to build a burning platform. I mean, one of the best ways for organizations to change something is a crisis, but a real crisis can maybe too late. So our thinking was, can we preempt a crisis? Can we actually manufacture a crisis, at least in a on paper, and try and understand what can an organization do should that crisis actually happen, even though it hasn't yet happened? And so the whole idea was very simple. Can we build a burning platform, make executives, senior leaders of an organization genuinely think what could completely disrupt their business, and then ask them the question, what should you do when it comes to your future strategy? And this outside in view turns out to radically change the way people think about their future, as opposed to if you don't ask these questions.
Hmm.
So, Ken, in a very simplistic way, our book is about re asking the same question in a different way. Where back in the day, the question was, what should be your strategy so that you do better than today, tomorrow? The question is, what should be your strategy if you have to figure out a way to survive an oncoming disruption?
Right.
And hence the first question is, what could be all the ways that you can get disrupted? Can you actually start thinking about all the ways that your business can go down? And that forces people to completely change their perspective and start thinking about their strategy in a very, very different way.
So, in an example, and I'm obviously just kind of thinking out loud here, but an example of this principle might be taking, let's say, a market share dominant player like Apple, right?
Mhm.
And saying something like, "What if 5 years from now, cell phones were not the main way we communicated?" Would that be like the maybe not a great example, but would that be the type of scenario that you would play in with a business to say, what if, I mean, I think iPhones generate 70% of their revenue and 85% of their profits or something. So what if iPhones, what if that just wasn't the thing? What if it slipped to 10% of revenue? What would we do? Would that be a typical scenario that you try to play out?
Yeah, and I would even ask them a simpler question in the same spirit. But in fact, let me step back a little bit. I would actually, before I even do this, ask them. So if I have Apple executives with me, I would sit down and say, what do you think is important for your strategy going forward? There is no bias in this question. Very simple question. What do you think is important for your strategy going forward? What are your priorities? And let them write it down. Once they've committed to answering that question and give them whatever time they want, then Ken, I would ask them this question. And I would simply say, listen, imagine an unconstrained company, Nuco. And I don't even want to give it a name as your existing competitor. Let's just call it Nuco. If Nuco came in the market and this Nuco had a lot of resources to invest in terms of technology and business model, what would Nuco look like that took your business out? And if you want to focus on your iPhone, let's focus on iPhone. What would Nuco or a group of Nucos look like that could completely take out your iPhone business so that you, from a 70% domination of the market, go down to 5%? And hence, I'm not asking what can Samsung do, and I'm not asking what can some other Huawei or any
Because
of these.
they have biases towards those companies.
they
Like, well,
they have
Samsung can't do
biases.
anything. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And so somebody could start thinking, well, what if cell phones are no longer needed? Like we rely on devices, right? We
Hmm.
have a device through which, but what if we become device agnostic, that our entire phone is on the cloud and anything that connects to the cloud can be immediately substituted for my cell phone? So whether it's a thing that's in my hand, whether it's a thing in my in front of my table, whether it's a thing which is my electronic notebook, whatever it is, the minute I connect to my cell phone cloud, I disrupt. Now, I'm just making this up, but you
Sure.
get the point. What would that look like, and could it take my business out? And once you discuss the dimensionalities of what Nuco could look like, what are the parameters it has, what is the functionalities it has, what are the capabilities they have, I then ask the Apple people the same question. Well, what do you need to do as an organization to make sure that if that was to happen, your iPhone business would still stay intact? What are the capabilities you need to build today to survive that kind of an attack tomorrow? Once they do this exercise, I ask them another very simple question. Can you please tell me what should be your future forward looking strategic priorities now? And what you find, Ken, is that the new set of priorities that they write look very, very different
Right.
than the first set of priorities that they wrote. Ken, it is also important for me to point out that I'm not saying that the second set of priorities are better than the first set of priorities. I'm simply saying the first set of priorities is what you naturally think. The second set, we need to engineer a process that comes out. Now, as an organization, you have two sets of priorities. You do a bit more deeper analysis and introspection to figure out what of these two lists become your actionable priorities and
Mm.
what do you keep in the parking lot. So this is about expanding your horizon as opposed to saying this method is better and you doing your usual strategic analysis is not better. No, I'm expanding the things that you think about. Now you do your analysis and figure out what of the two lists you'll choose and move forward with.
I'm guessing the type of questions that you're asking, at least for me, sparks maybe more innovation. Because if you have a threat that's that big, you have to think a lot more out of the box rather than 10% year over year growth from a new product line or something like that, which would be a typical, you know, short term kind of goal instead of we need to revamp the entire line, which maybe they do, maybe they don't, but it might be a good question to ask. Well, what did you see? You know what I going back to COVID for a second. What I think is interesting is so the new code just got introduced to a lot of businesses in March of 2020, right? It wasn't a company, it was a virus, but you know what did you see shift? I mean, I guess during COVID, or what didn't shift for companies? What were some of the common things that you saw out of successful? I've got so many questions for you. I don't want to bundle too many together, but you know, you were finishing the book. I'm imagining right when COVID hit, and then it got published in the fall, and you got to kind of in real time see both companies you were working with and consulted with, and ones that you didn't. Did you see common threads on the ones that really? Because there were businesses that thrived on the back of COVID, and there were businesses that obviously completely failed. Did you have any findings from that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ken, because uh, it was a very interesting, let's call it a natural experiment that the world was thrown into, and of course, a very unfortunate one. And we always wish none of that had ever happened. But given that it happened, a lot of observations came out of it. Number one, there are organizations who were simply lucky, right? They were just positioned in a way that they were able to come out of COVID in a much more stronger way. That's not of interest to us, right? Because serendipity is serendipity, but that's
Sure.
not of interest, right? What was interesting was uh, is the organizations that were able to show a degree of agility that allowed them to quickly think about all the pivots that are available to them in order to come out, well, first of all, survive the disruption that COVID brought about, and not just survive, but actually then thrive coming out of COVID. And the ones that we found were the ones who were precisely not locked into thinking of the past, who
Mm-hmm.
realized that they need to be agile, that they need to constantly think about how to reinvent themselves, that took the Phoenix mindset, so to speak, to heart, which is they were not anchored into the old way of doing business. Well, this is what we are good at, this is what we do. It's good to realize what you're good at, but you don't have to stick to what you do just because you've done it in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So great example of that is something like Fuji. I mean, I talked about Kodak just a while ago. Look at Fuji. Fuji has been doing amazingly well. And one of the reasons they've been doing amazingly well is that they know what they're good at, but they did not stick to what they were doing in the past. And every time they found opportunities of pivoting, of leveraging their strengths and building new capabilities to move into doing different things, they did it and they came out at the back of it very strong. So even think about COVID as a specific example. Fuji, photographs, films. What do they have? Films have clean surfaces. They're very good at dealing with chemicals. Well, during COVID, Fuji was making disinfectants, right? And it was very good time, but they had the capability and they immediately were able to pivot. Uh, Films again, it handles light, it reflects light off of surfaces. So, as you know, Fuji now has a pretty interesting business in cosmetics because what is cosmetics? Is about dealing with chemicals, but in a way that they reflect light in a different way. So, you can build adjacencies, you can build pivot moments in your business but it requires the Phoenix mindset, which is that I'm not going to rely on all the success factors in the past and just stick to my guns and continue down that path. I think organizations that used this mindset showed the agility to pivot, showed the agility to adapt, showed the agility to reinvent themselves, and they came out stronger in our observation. And of course, my co-author Paddy on the book, he always says, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. So thinking about disruption before it happens
Hmm.
gives you the best chance of fighting it as opposed to fighting it when it happens. And that's exactly organizations like. So I talked about Fuji. It's not like Fuji COVID made Fuji agile. COVID was Fuji was always agile. And during COVID, they leveraged their agility to make sure that they come out of it stronger, right?
Right.
So that's the important thing to note here.
You know what I thought was really interesting, kind of watching this play out in real time, and it's small business to me at its best. But we were living in New York City. We're the only idiots that moved into New York City when COVID started, but our adult kids are out here, so this is where we wanted to be. And um, you'd go down the road, walking down the street, busy street, Lower East Side of Manhattan, and you'd see a restaurant that was shuttered, doors closed, out of business, or maybe they'd be back, but they were closed for COVID. You'd see another one that was maybe a 6-table restaurant before COVID, right? Now, due to laws that were enacted because of COVID, they built out onto the sidewalk and even into the street, much the way they do in Europe. They have 25 tables now that they're not paying rent on. And then they also opened because they figured out that takeout was the new thing. They also kind of perfected their to go business and had a window that the bicycles could just run up and pick up food and stuff like that. And you looked at it and you went, oh my God. I mean, because you could see them right next to each other, and I know it's a very layman's kind of example, but it was playing out in real time. You saw it with all, barber shops, you saw it with restaurants, you saw it with any kind of small services business where some like leaned in and went, okay, what do I do? Like the rules have changed, and how do I change with them? And you have other people that said, I guess I'll just wait it out and hope for the best.
Yeah.
And some of those restaurants didn't make it, and other ones are thriving now.
Ken, I mean, such an interesting example. And again, it goes back to what I fundamentally said. This is not about a magic strategy. This is about a mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a big, big focus that people sometimes forget. They think there is some framework, there's some strategy out there. No, it's just about having that mindset of not getting trapped into blinkered thinking. I mean, look at Airbnb, COVID, great example, right? Entire travel industry was decimated. Airbnb was thriving. Why? They had the mindset. They said, fine, travel is not going to be the usual one. But turns out, unlike you, Ken, many people from big cities, because of work from home, wanted to move out to the suburbs
Right.
into these big houses where they have a lot because they're going to be locked in for some time. So Airbnb said, okay, great idea. Let's now figure out a way to cater to that new demand. Can we get these big suburban houses for long-term stay as opposed to the short-term urban condos, which is what used to be their primary kind of business category? And so while all the hotels in the world and all the airlines in the world are struggling to figure out what to do when travel is decimated, Airbnb is coming out blazing guns and doing amazingly well because they quickly recognized a new market segment, figured out a way to cater to that market segment, and out you go. Your revenues from one segment go down, but the other segment go up. Mindset. It's not magic. It's not complicated. This is not genius at all. This is simply a mindset. And so you're absolutely right. You with that example that you shared.
What's happened? I mean, like I said, the first podcast I heard you on was Nick's. Again, middle of COVID, early COVID. AI was in your world. You were maybe talking about it more. In my world, it was something kind of in the future, and now it's just right in front of us. It's everywhere. What impact has that had on the work that you do, or the work that you think businesses should be doing to prepare for the next disruption to their business?
The impact has been, Ken, it's almost monotonic. The importance of thinking about future proofing your business by understanding that it cannot be business as usual. That we need to constantly think about what are the new ways that we can do things, what are the new things we can do, how can we do different things, how can we do things differently, and what role technology will play. Those questions are now becoming more and more mainstream. I haven't met a single organization that is not asking these questions now. And so what used to be a thing that, yes, it's good, what used to be a good to have, to think about future proofing your organization, is now a need to have.
Hmm.
There is not a single organization that can sit out there and say our business is healthy and we should be okay. So people are saying, what does technology mean in terms of our the longevity of our business model? Technology because of AI, technology because of the generate, not just the AI in the traditional sense, but the generative AI and how that changes what we do, especially in knowledge industries with a lot of knowledge work, so to speak. And so the framework is kind of flexible because we can broad frame the questions of what is going to disrupt you, or we can narrow frame the questions who are interested in a specific technology. That how do you imagine Nuco can use Gen AI to completely disrupt your organization or your entire industry? And that will allow executives to work through a framework of what does this technology in particular mean to my business, right? So one of the things I like about the Phoenix Encounter method is that it can go extremely broad, but then we can also narrow it down and make it more fit for a specific burning question that executives may have.
What I also think is cool about it is when you talk about new core and or new co and you dig in and go, okay, what technologies are going to have? What kind of people are they going to have? What kind of, well, it doesn't exist. So that becomes the list of what you could take action on now, right? Like I'm in the recruiting business. If someone really leveraged AI and did some of the things that we're not doing that I haven't seen anyone do right now, what would that look like? And then it's like, well, why don't we just do it, right? I mean, is that the end result of a lot of this? Is like, let's be first to market on the actual thing that we might fear is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, cannibalization is something that people should be very careful about, right? Because not doing something because you think it'll cannibalize your business is literally an open invitation for somebody else to come and cannibalize your business.
Sure.
So if you think something is going to disrupt your business, then you rather be the first one to do it and go to market as the first one.
Right.
And so at least you secure your position in that space, because it would be a lot of hubris if you assume that nobody in this world is going to be able to do it. So Ken, I'll make it a little bit more concrete. Imagine I'm talking to bankers, right? One of the questions, the retail bank, one of the first questions I'll ask them is, are you in business because Google and Amazon and Meta are not interested in your business? Or are you in business because they cannot do your business? Because if the answer is that they are not interested, then you are in trouble,
Yeah.
because then you're just waiting for one day for them to do it. And can I give you an example of that? I can,
Please.
because if you come to the eastern part of the world, China, Alibaba, technically speaking, or Ant Group, in my opinion, is the world's biggest bank. And so, the day in the western part of the world, the Googles and the Metas and the Amazons of the world decide to go all out like Ant Group, oh boy, every retail bank is going to be challenged in a way that they haven't perhaps been challenged. And so you got to figure that out, and you got to see, do you want to be the first one to do this? Now, perhaps regulation in some parts of the world can protect them, which is very interesting because I have a lot of bankers that I know who always complain about regulation.
But
And I tell
it's
them, I'm
protecting
like,
them. Yeah.
be very careful what you wish for, okay? So, but again, that's not good strategy. Good strategy does not rely on regulatory laws to protect you. Good strategy does not rely on the lack of interest in other organizations in coming for your business. Good strategy means that independent of regulatory protections and independent of other people's interest, you have a business that is so compelling that it is very difficult for somebody to come in and take your share of the market because your value proposition is just so compelling, right? That I think is, in a nutshell, to me, I guess it's a long-winded way of me saying, yes, you should take and run with it if you see an opportunity sitting out there, which is a better way to do business.
Yeah, where someone's going to do it, it might as well be us, right? And
Right.
um, that is super interesting. Do you think that are you working on another book right now on a follow up to? Because I'd be curious to see. Um, well, let me ask you that. What are you working on now? I know you're a busy guy. I know you're the dean of the school. I know you're working on a lot of stuff. But what are you working on now?
So, Ken, I'm not working on a book right now because of all the things you said. It really requires some time to sit down and 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 frame the thinking and thoughts together. However, I am extremely interested right now to try and make sense of what is the impact of Gen AI at both the work level, but ultimately at the organizational level and ultimately at the industry level. The reason this topic is becoming very interesting to me is because I see a lot of information out there that Gen AI is going to, have a $4 trillion impact, and it's going to do this, it's going to do that. But I think there are a lot of sweeping generalizations. Like if you dig through the details, it's not clear to me where is the impact, where is the business case, and what is it going to do. So just like the Phoenix mindset, I think it's important to understand what is the engine of value creation. How do you leverage technology to create value? Does it help you to create more value for the same customers? Does it help you to create value for a different set of customers? Does it help you capture a bigger share of the value that you create, or a combination of these factors? So I'm trying to distill out the where, when, and how of value creation and capture that this technology has to offer. The interesting part is that the answers to these questions keep changing because the technology is evolving so fast.
Right.
But what again doesn't change is the way we go about discovering the answers to these questions, right? That how do we try and figure out the different dimensionalities of value creation and capture that a technology which is so transformative has to offer. So my entire kind of headspace is really trying to see, because I consider this as a paradigm shifting kind of a technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think smaller companies are better equipped for what we're talking about to kind of prepare for the future, prepare for that because they're nimble, right? I mean, if they want to change their systems, their software, their whole product, if they want to, their staff. I mean, it's not moving 20 people around, and the software that supports them seems to be a much easier thing to do than 40,000. But then again, on the big business side, you've got capital, you've got scale, you've got the ability to move markets. But do you see separation in the approach on this between small and big business and the expectation of as it pertains to speed, right? Or ability to execute?
So indeed, it pertains to, so there are two things: speed, and second, it does allow for a lot of democratization of access to technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
So small businesses used to find it very hard to access technology, and they need there was a lot of barriers to them, right? And I definitely believe that those barriers have somewhat come down, and with time will go down further. On top of that, they have the kind of nimbleness and agility that you're talking about, simply for the fact that they don't have the rigidity that a large business usually has. Not because they're not well run, it's because large businesses require structure to be able to be managed, and that very structure that you need to manage them is that starts coming in your way when it comes to being agile and nimble. So yes, you're right in the sense that small businesses will have an advantage because of both these factors happening simultaneously. Their nimbleness as well as the barriers to accessing cutting edge technology going down. That said, large organizations are not completely clueless to what's happening.
Right.
So a lot of large organizations have now started running innovation more as a bottom-up approach where they allow for passion projects within the organization to allow for that nimbleness through a decentralized way of thinking about trying to do new things. And and as those passion projects or those decentralized pilots start showing some early results, then they use their structure and scale to then take it and scale it up.
Sure.
So they're playing an interesting kind of a very different dynamics towards innovation. Very, very interesting. It does lead to some tensions because sometimes what happens is a very nice decentralized pilot happened in a large organization. It was really interesting, very valuable. Suddenly that team finds that their baby was taken away from them because now it went to the
Yeah.
central team and it's trying to implement it at the organization wide. So it leads to some kind of organizational issues which are fine. I mean, they can be dealt with. They're not like the biggest challenges in the world. So I guess what I'm trying to tell you is that I do agree with you that there are advantages that smaller organizations will have in today's day and age, but it's not like big organizations are not being mindful of that and they're trying
Right.
their own way to figure out how to how to catch up. Now,
Yeah.
what is worrisome is organizations who are completely either in denial or stuck with like the deer with the headlights kind of a deal where they're like, wow, we have no idea what's happening. And so now let's have one central unit that will do this big roadmap analysis and figure out where our North Star is. And we're going to, and so they get into some sort of an inertia where they're only left into planning stage and there's really nothing happening. And so they want this big mega plan, but by the time they make this big mega plan, it's already too late. That is a bit of an interesting observation that I have that there are organizations still out there who are in a state of inactivity because of one of these reasons.
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes in a big organization, it's like, okay, let's pilot Chat GPT, and they're running their pilot, and in the length of time that it takes them to run the pilot, take it to the committee, make sure it's safe for their systems, et cetera. Now they're on Chat GPT 4, and it's
Right,
like, oh, we haven't tested that. Let's go test that, and
right.
um, how can larger companies, I mean, pilot programs, like you said, are one of the ways they do it. Have you seen some consistencies with larger companies that have implemented, you know, procedures, processes, whatever, to increase the speed of keeping up with new technologies?
Yeah, in fact, it's really interesting that you're bringing this up because just in the morning, I was having a conversation with one of the INSEAD alums, one of our INSEAD alums, who is a CEO of a of a very interesting organization based out of Germany. And let me not name anybody here, but it was a fascinating organization. And I asked him this question. I said, "How? What is the structure you're putting into place to be able to accelerate this, but at the same time, make sure that you maintain both the scale as well as the nimbleness, right? Like that's a trade-off." And what he told me, Ken, which really resonated with me, was he said, see, what we've done, Samir, is we've created a centralized team around AI, but we do not have the centralized team run any of the initiatives independent of the local teams, the pilot projects. The centralized team's mandate is to actually run it in partnership with all these local teams that are running this. Now, of course, at the leadership level, we have to have the judgment of which pilots get more resources and which pilots get perhaps less resources. And when do we pull the plug on the pilots that we don't think is showing the kind of results that we perhaps thought initially that they would show. So there is some executive kind of oversight in all of this to be able to make the right calls on the resource allocation, or at least, well, I shouldn't say right calls, but like reasonably good
Yeah,
calls on
yeah,
resource allocation. So it's so so it's so it's going in those in that direction. But the fact that this central team is mandated to work with the local teams, with the decentralized teams, and create that kind of partnership, not only showed that they were able to get both scale as well as nimbleness or agility, but also they found that the projects on an average performed much better than if solely run by the central team or solely run by the decentralized team.
Yeah, because I think you've
So,
got buy-in, you've got cooperation right away. Like as you were describing it, I'm like, well, that makes it significantly easier to deploy company wide because you've got
right,
some level of critical mass at both the field level and at the corporate level, right? And you've got
exactly,
people that are connected, have relationships at both levels as well, right? So it's
exactly,
not just coming out of left field and oh, is this the flavor of the month or whatever, you know?
exactly. And Ken, what is important in this too is also be mindful of the fact that this can create some turf wars. It can create some politics in the organization of, it's my territory. Why are you entering my territory? And that with this kind of a process, and I asked this person, the CEO, and I said, listen, do you see that as an issue? And he said, Samir, spot on, because that is, if you have a process of this nature, which on paper gets you best of both worlds, the implementation challenge is that this now requires people to really get into that synergistic mode of working, which can sometimes be a bit of a challenge because of all the issues that I mentioned earlier. And he says, well, that's where leadership comes in. He says, we are the leaders of the organization who need to step in. As a CEO, he says, my job is not to tell people what to do. My job is to now figure out how to make them work together. He says, if I can crack that problem, they will then figure out what are the good projects to work on and how to make them better.
Right.
So his attention as the leader of this organization is now making sure that that synergy is maintained, that people are able to work together, that the trust is created, and that he sees his role as the custodian of that trust. I like that because that says the leader needs to have an eye on what do I need to do in order to de-hurdle the field so that my teams can do what they do best,
Right.
right? I kind of like that, right? And so there is some pretty interesting takeaways that people can get from that.
I like it too because that speaks to culture. It speaks to vision. It speaks to things that should be handled at the top of the C-suite, really, at that level, right? And if your organization is constantly running into those issues over and over again, and you're the CEO, you probably got to look in the mirror, right? And go, something's broken in the culture. Yes, maybe it's human nature. Um, but what, we're not going to move forward even though it's the right thing to do because it's human nature. Exactly. Like what aren't we painting in our vision, in our culture, that people don't want to work together, right? So
Right,
amazing.
right.
Well, oh, go ahead, please.
And yeah, Ken, and as you were saying that, I loved how this conversation has evolved, and that's one of the beauties of having an organic conversation, because we've landed on the last topic of culture. And I want to now kind of, I think it brings us back a full circle because I started off and talking about mindset. And I think mindset of an individual is what I call the phoenix thinking. But the minute you put mindsets at the organization level, to me, that is the culture.
Right.
A collective mindset is the culture of the organization. And very often we say, what is the culture? How do you create the culture? And maybe by the way, Ken, to be very honest, I'm not a culture expert. So I'm way out of my depth in this, but I'm simply speaking from my experience and observation. And my experience and observation shows that if we can create a collective mindset where we have a common approach towards thinking, where we have a common, we don't have to have the common answer, but we have a common psychological thinking around how to future-proof the organization, how to be nimble, how to be agile, how to work together, how to unlock synergies. That to me is the founding basis of a culture.
Yes.
And so mindsets are individual, but when put collectively is what creates the culture of an organization. So the Phoenix encounter, where we started, and we kind of write about this in the book as well, is not only a method of future-proofing your organization or at least getting a good chance of future-proofing your organization, but it is also an important mechanism of creating a collective mindset and a collective culture in the organization.
Right. No, you said it well, and I think we'll wrap up there. I love what you were talking about there, though, because I've always, in recruitment, we have to talk a lot about culture, and that word gets used a lot. And I think people do have a hard time identifying it. And to me, the culture, in its simplest, is the personality of an organization, right, versus the personality of a person. So,
There you go.
and within that is also their integrity, their values, and all of that, the things that make up their personality, right?
Right.
And it makes it a lot easier, I think, to understand, like, do you fit this culture, right? Do you share some of these same values? But it's been lovely to meet you, Samir. Thank you for jumping on today.
Ken, it was an absolute pleasure, and I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you very much.
I did too. Thanks so much. I hope our paths cross again.
Likewise.
All right, take care.